Our last speaker before lunch is Mr. Steve Hommel. Steve is a principal engineer with Savannah River Remediation and has more than 15 years of experience working on performance assessments. I know Steve from the Yucca days. He is currently the subject matter expert for the Saltstone Disposal Facility, PA. In his current role, he has been the lead author on multiple PA-related documents, including technical reports related to FAPS analysis, conceptual model development, dose calculation, quantitative inventory analysis, and probabilistic uncertainty analysis. In addition to his technical writing, his expertise includes modeling, statistical and data analysis, and coding. Prior to come to SRR, he used to GoSim and other quantitative tools to develop the validation models for the TSPA for the Yucca Mountain project. Steve.
All right, thank you. All right, first of all, I'll apologize. I have a lot more slides than most of the other people, but I promise we'll go through them real quick. It's just going to be kind of a high level. Think of this as a bulleted discussion of what we're working on here at SRS to get our Z area Saltstone Disposal Facility PA put out. For those of you that won't be on the tour tomorrow, this is the area that we're looking at. Let's see So if you're coming in right here, you've got our Saltstone production facility where we mix our dry ingredients with our waste. It's been disposed of in our first two disposal units are the vaults 1 and 4, which are big rectangular units. Some lessons learned led to smaller cylindrical designs, and then as a cost savings, we've moved to larger designs for our disposal units. So why are we revising the PA now? The PA was issued back in 2009. A lot of new information has become available since then. We've got existing special analyses that we want to incorporate and pull everything together for our model. We have some process improvements and research and development activities that all feed into our update. The special analyses that we've done, well, I'll skip this in the interest of time. So the 2013 special analysis, so a special analysis is what we do whenever we have new information that comes to light that could bring into question the results of our performance assessment. It gives us a chance to just update some modeling to see what that does without having to do a full performance assessment. So in 2013, we did a special analysis where we updated our degradation of saltstone. Previously, our SDU concrete and our saltstone, well, the concrete was only degraded due to sulfate attack, and our saltstone was not degraded. We've now implemented carbonation into our SDU concrete as a degradation mechanism, and we now degrade saltstone due to decalcification. And what that did is, just as an example, this is our 150-foot diameter round disposal unit, the saltstone, the degradation of that saltstone over time. We looked at a couple of different cases in our special analysis. Previously, it would have just been that straight line across the bottom. And so by incorporating degradation mechanisms, we can now see how that affects the results. For our 2014 special analysis, this was when our design got updated to incorporate a really big disposal unit, the 375-foot diameter disposal units. And we also incorporated and then for the FY16 special analysis, we incorporated some as-built conditions from things that were seen in the field during and after construction of Saltstone Disposal Unit 6. So just to give you guys a sense of the scale, I put a little guy right there on the side. This is our 150-foot diameter disposal unit. It holds about 2.8 million gallons, and this is our new disposal unit. It still has the little guy there, and that holds about 32 million gallons of waste. This is what the layout looked like in our 2009 PA. We had 64 of these smaller disposal units, so it really did a good job of kind of spreading out our source. And now with the bigger guys, everything gets consolidated a little bit more. These are about twice as tall as the smaller units, so it really packs everything in real tight, which creates some challenges for us. So just a dose comparison, if we're looking at what our total doses look like in the 2009 PA, when we incorporated the degradation of saltstone, it obviously increases our peak doses. Most of our peak doses within 10,000 years are driven by iodine 129. For the FY14 special analysis, we brought in the bigger disposal units, so it kind of pulled everything together a little bit more tightly. And when we did some observations from the field and incorporated that into our FY16 special analysis, that particular change didn't make as big a difference. And then this is going out further in time, 50,000 years. We see a release of technetium here around 30,000 years. That's primarily driven by oxidation of the saltstone disposal units. You end up with a breakthrough curve at the bottom as the oxidation front moves down. All right, so some process improvements. Before we did the 2009 PA, we did not do a FEPS analysis. So this time around, we said, okay, let's do things in the right order. So we decided we were going to do our FEPS analysis. And from the FEPS analysis, that feeds into a conceptual model development, which then informs how we develop our models for the PA. So for our FEPS analysis, we collected a large numbers or a large list of features, events, and processes that would be considered for our initial FEPS list by looking at other FEPS documents from other sites. We just compiled a list of all the possible FEPS out there. Because I was looking at documents, at multiple documents from multiple sites, there was a lot of overlap, so we had to go through and remove or combine very similar FEPS. So we ended up with 245 unique FEPS. But then we also went back and looked at the 2009 PA and other documents related to the 2009 PA and found 100 additional FEPS that we wanted to consider for our FEPS analysis. From that, we had our screening criteria for FEPS. So we gathered a team of various subject matter experts, and we sat down and we looked at each of the FEPS. We evaluated them based on perceived frequency and perceived impact. This did not have the same kind of schedule or budget that a FEPS analysis for the total system performance assessment at Yucca Mountain would have had. So we had some constraints. So it was mostly driven by perception, but we tried to get the right people in the room that had the right perception or could describe and understand the processes that were being considered. So from that, we did a phased approach to our FEPS analysis. We ended up screening in 284 of our FEPS and screening out 61 of the FEPS. So a lot of stuff was left in the list of things to consider. From our FEPS list, we were able to go down and create our conceptual model. And as we developed our conceptual model for what the PA would represent, we organized things into what we call leading diagonal elements. And let me skip ahead here. So the leading diagonal elements are listed diagonally, hence the term leading diagonal elements in blue here. And then in yellow, these are interactions between the leading diagonal elements. These are off-diagonal elements. For example, precipitation was our first leading diagonal element, and closure cap was the second one. So up here in the top, you've got infiltration. That's the precipitation influencing the closure cap. By organizing everything this way, it forced us to really start thinking about what kind of interactions need to be considered as we develop our model. It's a lot of work up front, but it saves us time in terms of trying to understand how everything is going to come together, because there are so many different aspects to be considered, and not just with our disposal units, but also how the environmental releases will be taken up by the receptor or the human, depending on who you're talking to. All right, so some of our conceptualizations that we did, when we did our conceptual model development, I wasn't involved in the 2009 PA, and I came at this with kind of fresh eyes, and reading through the 2009 PA and some of the special analyses, I said, okay, there's a lot of text here that explains the beginning and the end, but not a whole lot that explains what's going on in the middle. So I wanted to develop some text and some figures that will help readers understand just what's going on. So, for example, I developed this figure that shows the process of decalcification. So you can imagine this as our Saltstone matrix. So that's the waste form. It's sitting on top of the concrete floor. It also has walls, but it's not shown in this particular conceptualization. But you've got the floor, and then you've got soil. And as water moves through, it depletes the calcium and degrades our hydraulic conductivity. And it creates what we call a shrinking core, and releases that calcium into the environment. So you've got leachate impacts on the soil until it gets fully depleted. Another example of the conceptualization for flow affecting our disposal units. Initially, the hydraulic conductivity of the roof of the SDUs is very, very low, so it deflects a lot of the flow coming down. But then as time goes on, everything gets degraded, so you start getting increased flow, and eventually we assume an end state where flow through the disposal units is very similar to flow through the surrounding soils. All right, so after we had described our conceptual model, we went back to our FEPS list and said, okay, does our conceptual model reflect all of the FEPS that we identified as relevant? From that, we identified that there were 51 FEPS that just don't really fit in modeling. It had to do with kind of more regulatory stuff, things that are described outside of the PA itself. But then there were 108 FEPS that reflected our leading diagonal elements, 55 FEPS that were related to our off-diagonal elements, and that left us with 70 FEPS to consider in other ways. So we developed some alternative conceptual models and sensitivity models that we're going to incorporate into the PA. For example, as a modeling simplification, we generally think of our saltstone waste form as just one big homogeneous mass. We know that based on salt batching, as the waste gets developed, that there's sometimes higher concentrations or lower concentrations, or curing conditions can change. And so there's going to be some variability in a stratified form. So we are going to include a sensitivity model to address that sort of thing. The other thing our PA is incorporating is research and development. One of the big exciting things that has happened here at Savannah River site is we were able to go out into the field and drill into one of our disposal units, Saltstone Disposal Unit 2A, in order to extract cores that we could actually take into the laboratory and compare the field in place samples to laboratory prepared samples to see if the information matches, and if we can use laboratory prepared samples as a surrogate for understanding the processes. So this was a long endeavor. We had to build huts, and workers were RAD qualified. It was a challenge to get the core. Our goal was to get something that had cured for a significantly longer amount of time than what is typically studied, just to get a better sense for long-term conditions. So in this case, we were able to drill to a depth that reflected saltstone that had cured for 20 months, as opposed to 28 days, which is sometimes used as used for measuring things like hydraulic conductivity. The cores came out looking really good. There wasn't much damage from the drilling process, which is something that we were concerned about. If they had come out really damaged, it could bring into question some of the results. So that they were able to, in the laboratory, Savannah River National Lab was able to measure hydraulic conductivities down to 1e to the minus 9th. Of 6 samples in this picture, 4 of them were below 1e to the minus 9th. centimeters per second for hydraulic conductivity, which is reassuring because in our previous modeling we were assuming 6.4 e to the minus ninth. So that tells us that in general our hydraulic conductivity is lower than what we had previously assumed. So we can take some credit for the new data based on these cores. In addition to that, we're also doing some dynamic leaching method tests with John Seaman in the Savannah River Ecology Lab. He's been working on developing these DLM test flexible wall permeameter. Basically, flow comes in, and then we can collect the leachate that comes out of it. From that, we can measure radionuclide concentrations, chemical element concentrations, hydraulic conductivity, pH, and EH. So from the DLM testing, this is 7 samples. You can see that there is significant variability between the different samples. The green line up here is one of the 2A cores. The gray line here is another 2A core. So they kind of bound our results, and the rest of these are simulant samples. So there is significant variability, but it's something that we're looking at and considering for our new model. We're also looking at technetium-99 concentrations. So we're seeing what the solubility of technetium-99 is as water flushes through these samples, as well as iodine-129. Again, technetium-99 and iodine-129 are our 2 most significant dose drivers. So it's important that we understand and characterize that data properly. Another source of uncertainty in the PA has been our inventory. Generally, our inventory comes from the tank farms out at Savannah River site. The tank farms have soluble waste that gets processed and sent to the disposal facility. The blue dots here represent cesium-137, which we have a lot of data on because we have a lot of cesium-137. We have significantly fewer characterization points for technetium-99 in red and iodine-129 in yellow. But one thing I did is a statistical analysis, and I determined that iodine-129 and tech-99 are closely correlated with cesium-137 concentrations. So because we have a lot of cesium-137 concentrations, we can use that data to reduce the uncertainty. We were able to identify which tanks we believed had the most technetium and the most iodine, and we were able to go out and sample those tanks. And when we sampled those tanks, it improved. And luckily, all the data points lined up pretty closely with our correlation curves. So just to give an update on where all this information is feeding into, we have our model progress. We've basically finished our closure cap model, our cementitious degradation model, our contaminant release model, our vadose flow model, our vadose transport model, our aquifer transport model, our air pathway release model, and our dose and exposure pathways model. And this chart here is really busy, but what it's showing is that when we say PA model, we're not really talking about just one model. It's actually a whole bunch of models. And a lot of these models have interrelationships that have to be considered. You don't want to make inconsistent assumptions where you assume one thing about a disposal unit concrete over here and make a different assumption over there. So it's important to understand all the connections between the different models so that you can try to get a cohesive and understandable end result that makes sense. All right, so in terms of what we've done here, this is our deterministic base case model, and that's complete, but the probabilistic model is under development still, and our alternative conceptual models and our sensitivity models are still in various stages of progression. So some of our biggest modeling changes, just to kind of recap, is our closure cap model has been completely revised. For those of you that called in to the last WebEx seminar that we had for the community of practice here, this figure will look familiar. Craig Benson at the University of Virginia helped us by developing this model that uses much more realistic infiltration assumptions. This black curve here represents what we used to assume for our infiltration rate through our closure cap, and these other curves represent different cases that we can consider for our updated PA model. So as you can see, it's significantly lower infiltration. It just has to do with understanding the system better and removing some unrealistic assumptions. This is the updated groundwater model. Greg just talked about that, so I'll skip that. And also Vanderbilt, Brown, who spoke earlier this morning, talked about the geometric averaging of the degradation rate for cementitious materials. Previously, we had used an assumed linear degradation rate, and now we believe that this is more representative of what the hydraulic degradation will look like over time. And that's it.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve, for a very nice presentation. 2 questions. First, 400 millirems, did you have a problem with that, or?
That was a challenge to explain. I'll just leave it at that without going into too much detail. It was a challenge.
It just seems like, okay. I mean,
part of that is we believe that that's kind of a modeling artifact and not truly how the release is going to happen.
What about the 12 millirems?
The 12 millirems, it is very close to the performance objectives, and that is a challenge that we've had here on site.
Okay, yeah. And then the other one, how did you pick your diagonal FEPs, and how did you order them on the diagonal?
What we did was we really based it on the 2009 PA and the updates since then. We just looked at which features of the model are prominent features that need to be included in the model, as opposed to little one-off things like the tops of the disposal units have portals. We don't need to model every single feature. So we're looking at kind of the big features that are going to influence the model results the most.
But was there an order, like from?
Oh yes, in general, it goes from it goes in the direction of flow and or transport. So if you start at the top, it starts with precipitation, which is going to drive flow, and when you get all the way to the end, it's the things that affect concentrations and the releases to the environment.
So are your, as long as I got the microphone, I mean, going back to the high dose rates, is this going to induce a change in R&D, a change in construction?
That's what drove a lot of the research and development we did. We knew that we had a lot of conservative assumptions, what we believe were conservative assumptions or bounding assumptions within our models. So we did a lot of research and development to better understand the saltstone waste form and how that's going to degrade over time. More work to understand what our inventory was. A lot of the information that's new was driven by trying to reduce that risk.
Okay, thanks.
Of course, for NRC, we reviewed the 2009, we reviewed the 13-14. A lot of that, for that late 40,000 year, 400 millirem. You know, in 2009, remember, you're having 64 sources all fail at exactly the same time. So that tends to be part of the modeling artifact of how much of that for iodine versus the timing, which we did look into ourselves in our review. They have had some effective simplification by having less tanks, except for the fact that now they're just bigger, and if you assume that one fails, then it pulses of itself. But that's how the cells have been. But we've been in discussions for a very long time about looking out then and saying how much is that modeling from decisions that are saying that all this stuff is happening in a very short period of time. It's like the old, if we have a constant rate of packages and then all of a sudden all the packages fail at the same time. So.
Other questions, comments for Steve?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.